It was the summer of 1987 in Millbrook, a quiet town where nothing ever seemed out of place. That illusion broke on June 12th, when flames tore through the Riverside textile mill just before midnight. Fire engines roared through the narrow streets, and the town watched as smoke poured into the night sky. Leading the first crew inside was Lieutenant Daniel "Danny" Walsh, 32 years old, a 10-year veteran of the fire department. For the first half hour it looked like any other dangerous fire, but at 12:11 a.m. something happened. Danny's voice came across the radio. He reported hearing a loud metallic crash somewhere in the basement. Seconds later, the signal cut off. No one heard from him again. 17 minutes later, with the roof ready to collapse, the order to evacuate was given. The crew rushed out, gasping for air, counting heads. One was missing. Danny had vanished inside the burning mill. The only trace was his helmet, blackened with soot, and a charred pager lying near a side door that shouldn't have been open. The town woke the next morning to shocking headlines. Firefighter disappears inside burning mill. At first, people assumed it was a tragic accident, but the longer the search dragged on, the stranger it became. No body, no equipment, no explanation. Rumors spread fast. Some believed Danny had been trapped under the wreckage. Others whispered he walked out of the fire on his own. Within days, suspicion turned on his personal life. A bitter custody dispute with his ex-wife, old grudges in town, and a black notebook Danny kept filled with notes on suspicious fires around Riverside. The case shifted from a tragic workplace accident to something darker. Witnesses reported seeing a white box truck near the mill before the fire. Others recalled two figures standing by the river just as the blaze grew out of control. Evidence hinted at arson, but investigators focused on Danny's private disputes instead. What began as a desperate search for a missing firefighter soon unraveled into one of the most haunting cold cases this town has ever known. A man sworn to fight fire disappeared in the very blaze he was trying to stop. June 1987. Millbrook, a small American town where nights were usually quiet. At 11:42 p.m., the alarm cut through the silence. A fire had broken out at Riverside Mill, the old textile factory at the edge of town. Within minutes, flames were rising against the night sky, and the streets echoed with the sound of sirens. Engine 3 was the first to arrive. Firefighters jumped from the truck, pulling hoses across the yard. The blaze was spreading fast. Smoke pushed upward. But investigators would later note the unusual density rising from the basement. For the men on the ground, there was no time to question it. They rushed inside. Leading them was Lieutenant Daniel "Danny" Walsh, 32 years old, a 10-year veteran of the Millbrook Fire Department. This was his shift, his crew, and his responsibility. Danny had been in countless fires before, but Riverside was different. The smoke was heavier. The heat came on faster. He guided his team through the choking corridors, splitting groups to sweep the main floor and the lower levels. At 12:11 a.m., Danny's voice came over the radio. Clear, firm. He said he had heard a metallic crash in the basement and was going down to check. It was the last transmission ever recorded from him. Seconds later, static cut through the line. Then, nothing. The crew tried calling back, but no answer came. Seconds passed. Then, minutes. Inside the mill, the fire raged hotter. Beams groaned under the pressure. Sparks fell from the ceiling. The order came down at 12:28. Evacuate immediately before the roof collapsed. Exhausted firefighters stumbled out into the night air. Helmets off. Faces blackened with soot. Some believed Danny had been buried under the collapse. Others thought he had tried to find another way out. A few even suggested he had walked away on his own. But none of those theories matched what little evidence there was. A scorched helmet, a destroyed pager, an unlocked side door that should have been bolted shut. What happened inside Riverside Mill during those 17 minutes would haunt Millbrook for years. The disappearance of a firefighter on duty, in full view of his crew and his community, was not something anyone could make sense of. Danny Walsh's fate remained a question no one could answer that night. Was he trapped beneath the rubble? Was he forced out through the side door? Or was something else hiding behind the smoke? To understand what really happened, the town would have to look closer at the man who vanished and the secrets he carried with him. If this mystery has already gripped you, don't forget to hit like so more people can discover the story, and subscribe to follow every step of this cold case. In the next part, we'll step away from the fire and look at who Danny Walsh really was, the firefighter, the father, and the man some believed carried dangerous secrets about Riverside. Stay with us and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened in those 17 missing minutes? Daniel "Danny" Walsh had been a firefighter for a decade. He joined the Millbrook Fire Department young, and by 32 he was already a lieutenant. His record was strong, his reputation solid. 4 years earlier, in 1983, he pulled 2 children from a burning house and was recognized by the town for bravery. Neighbors knew his name, and in Millbrook, his uniform meant respect. Danny was not just another firefighter. He was the man parents pointed out to their kids as a hero. But outside the firehouse, Danny's life was more complicated. Friends remember him with his daughter Emily, a little girl who loved to climb into his lap while he was still in uniform. Pictures show him holding her, helmet tucked under his arm, smiling with pride. Emily was 6 years old in 1987. After the divorce, she became the center of his world. Every free hour was spent with her. Every decision was... Money made things worse. Firefighter pay in Millbrook was modest, and after legal fees and child support, Danny struggled. Laura would later tell investigators he often worked extra shifts to keep up with bills. He was tired, sometimes worn down, but never late, never careless. His colleagues respected his discipline. They said he carried the weight, but he did not drop it. Still, there were changes in him that friends began to notice. He was quieter, more withdrawn, sometimes distracted. A fellow firefighter said Danny had looked exhausted in the weeks before the fire. He was the kind of man who kept things to himself, but the stress was there in his eyes. What most people didn't know was that Danny was keeping notes. In his locker at the firehouse, he kept a small black notebook. He filled it with details of fires he thought were suspicious. Addresses, dates, insurance information, patterns he didn't like. And again, those entries pointed back to the Riverside district. There had been too many blazes, too close together, all linked to properties with insurance payouts. That notebook vanished the same night Danny did. After the fire, when his locker was checked, the book was gone. No one admitted to taking it. Its absence left a shadow over everything that followed. In the weeks before the Riverside blaze, Danny hinted to his colleagues that he was close to exposing something. More than once, he was overheard saying, "I'm about to bring everything into the light." At the time, no one pressed him. After his disappearance, those words became central to the investigation. To the public, Danny remained a split figure. On one side, he was the decorated firefighter, the devoted father, the man who risked his life for others. On the other side, he was a man under financial strain, fighting with his ex-wife, and chasing theories about insurance fraud that few took seriously. Both images existed at once, and the uncertainty fueled speculation. His parents never wavered. They insisted their son would never abandon Emily, never walk away. They rejected the rumors that Danny had staged his disappearance to escape debt. To them, and to his daughter, he was a man of duty, and something terrible had been done to him. But in a small town, private troubles become public stories. The divorce, the money, the arguments, these became part of the narrative.
Danny's story then was not just about a firefighter who vanished in a blaze. It was about a man trapped between two worlds, the public hero and the private life unraveling. And in that divide, theories multiplied. Some saw sacrifice, others saw secrets. To find answers, the investigation had to move beyond Danny's life and back to the ground where it all happened. The Riverside Mill held more than flames. It held clues that did not fit the picture of a simple accident. A side door left open, a trace of gasoline on the basement floor, a photograph of a white truck near the building, witnesses who remembered figures by the river. The story of Danny Walsh could not be told only through who he was. It had to be told through what was left behind at Riverside. And that is where the search for the truth turned next. After the flames were finally put out, Riverside Mill stood in ruins. The site was sealed off, the air still heavy with smoke and ash. Investigators stepped inside what was left of the factory, and almost immediately, questions began to surface. Some of the details did not look like the aftermath of an accident. They looked like signs of something else. Attention turned first to the side door. Fire crews knew it well, but on that night, it should have been locked. The lock itself had been replaced only recently, yet investigators found it marked with fresh pry scratches. Someone had forced it. The door raised a troubling question. Who had used it, and why? Down in the basement, the smell of fuel lingered. Samples were taken from the scorched concrete floor. They revealed traces of N-hexane, a chemical commonly linked to arson. It was not something that would appear by chance. It was not something that matched the official assumption of a simple electrical fire. The presence of accelerant changed the entire picture of what might have happened inside Riverside. On the floor above, another piece of evidence stood out. A set of footprints was found pressed into soot and ash. The prints matched the size and tread of firefighter boots, size 10. But the heels showed unusual wear, a grinding pattern inconsistent with the boots issued to Millbrook's Engine 3. At best, it meant the prints didn't belong to Danny's team. At worst, it meant someone else had been in the building that night. Nearby, and then there was the Polaroid. A local man, curious about the fire, had taken a photo just before the blaze reached full strength. In the image, behind the haze of smoke and distant flames, a white box truck appeared parked near the side door. Its position was suspicious, its timing damning. The photograph, however, was blurred by glare. The license plate could not be read. The vehicle remained unidentified. The photo mattered even more once a witness came forward. A woman who lived near the mill told police she had seen two figures standing by the riverbank just before the fire roared out of control.
She could not describe their faces, only their silhouettes in the dark. She was sure they were there, but who they were and what they were doing, no one could say. Evidence piled up, but so did frustration. This was 1987. Forensic technology was limited. The fuel residue, the footprints, even the Polaroid, all were logged, but none could be pushed further. Today, accelerant traces would be confirmed in hours. Prints could be compared to national databases, and photo enhancement might recover a plate number. Back then, much of it was left as notes in a case file, waiting for answers that could not be found. And still, no trace of Danny. The search crews combed the rubble for days, pulling away twisted beams and collapsed masonry. Nothing. No body, no clothing, no tools. Nothing except his scorched helmet and burned pager, discovered near the side door. For a firefighter missing inside an inferno, the absence was almost as loud as the fire itself.
Faced with the unexplained, investigators tried to close the gap with theory. Two possibilities emerged. 1. Danny had been trapped, buried somewhere deep in the collapse, beyond reach. 2. He had been pulled, or had gone willingly, out through that side door. Both ideas were plausible. Neither could be proven. Instead of focusing on the strange evidence at Riverside, the police began to turn in a different direction. Their official line leaned toward personal conflict, not arson. The open lock, the fuel traces, the unidentified truck, the witness by the river, all of it slipped into the background. What remained in the foreground were Danny's private battles, his divorce, and the custody fight for his daughter. It was easier to believe a domestic motive than to build a case for organized arson. Easier to question the people closest to him than to chase shadows in the smoke. And so, slowly, the investigation moved away from Riverside Mill itself. The side door, the chemical traces, the missing notebook, these became secondary. What took center stage were the people in Danny's life. And at the top of that list was Laura Bennett, the ex-wife. She had been seen arguing with Danny 2 days before the fire. She was in the middle of a custody dispute. She had access to places through her family connections. In the eyes of the investigators, she became the most obvious lead. But the problem was clear. None of the strange details at Riverside pointed to Laura. They pointed somewhere else, to something broader, something still hidden. That tension between the evidence of a staged fire and the decision to focus on Danny's private world would define the next stage of the case.
The mystery of Riverside was not solved in its ashes. The door remained pried, the fuel lingered in the basement, and the photograph of the white truck gathered dust in a folder. Yet the investigation marched toward Laura Bennett, setting her up as the prime suspect. The story of Danny Walsh was about to leave the burned factory floor and enter the courtroom of public opinion. And in that space, suspicion fell hardest on the person who had once been closest to him. Laura Bennett was 30 years old in 1987. She worked as a nurse at Millbrook General, a face people recognized in the small town. She was also the ex-wife of Danny Walsh. Their divorce had been finalized only 6 months before the fire. At the center of that separation was a 6-year-old girl, Emily, whose custody became the source of constant arguments. In Millbrook, Laura was both familiar and controversial, and when Danny disappeared inside Riverside Mill, suspicion moved quickly in her direction. To investigators, the motive seemed obvious. Custody battles were often bitter, and Laura was in a fragile financial position. She earned a steady wage, but not enough to comfortably support herself and her daughter without help. Police believed that if Danny were gone, custody would fall into her hands more easily. The theory was simple, easy to sell, and it gave the case a direction when so many other details of the fire remained unresolved. 2 days before the blaze, there had been a public argument. It took place at the town baseball field. Danny and Laura were seen standing near the bleachers, voices raised, visible to parents and kids who had gathered for a game. Witnesses later recalled sharp words, gestures that suggested real anger. By the time word of that scene spread, it had become a small-town rumor factory. People said the fight was ugly. People said Laura had threatened him. Whether true or not, the story was repeated so often that it hardened into a version of fact. On the night of the fire, Laura was officially on shift at the hospital. The roster listed her as present. Colleagues remembered her there for much of the night, but one detail left an opening. Local newspapers seized on the story with speed. Headlines spoke of jealousy, revenge, a custody battle turned violent. Jealous ex-wife questioned in firefighter's disappearance ran across the front page of the Millbrook Herald. The framing was sensational, and the impact immediate. The town began to believe Laura was not only involved, but central. Her family pushed back. Relatives gave statements insisting she was innocent, that police were ignoring stronger evidence at the mill. They said Laura was being used as an easy target. But public opinion in a small town is hard to reverse once it turns, and in 1987, the court of public opinion was louder than any legal file. Through it all, Laura cooperated. She attended interviews. She answered questions. She provided everything investigators requested. But it did not matter. In Millbrook, her name was whispered with the same certainty as if she had been caught in the act. She carried the label of suspect even as the evidence against her remained thin. The consequences were personal and relentless. At the hospital, colleagues kept their distance. Some patients asked to be reassigned. Old friends stopped visiting. Her reputation was marked by the image painted in headlines: the jealous wife, the manipulative partner, the one with everything to gain from Danny's disappearance. Her daughter was not shielded from the fallout either. Children at school repeated what they heard at home, and the stigma spread from mother to child. Despite the pressure, investigators never uncovered direct proof. No forensic evidence tied Laura to Riverside that night. No witness placed her at the mill. No fingerprints, no fibers, no blood. All that existed were circumstance and rumor. Yet in the eyes of many, that was enough. The irony was painful. At a time when real evidence from the fire, accelerant traces, footprints that didn't belong to the crew, an unidentified truck, was sitting unanswered. Attention was fixed instead on Laura. The case against her was built not on science but on suspicion. She became the scapegoat for a mystery no one yet understood. In the end, there were no... Mike Russo was 35 years old, the kind of man people in Millbrook described as loud, hot-tempered, and impossible to ignore. He ran a small place on Main Street called Russo's Place, a bar known for cheap beer, late nights, and too many fights. To the community, Mike was trouble waiting to happen, and when Danny Walsh vanished, his name rose quickly to the surface. The history between the two men only fueled suspicion. Months before the fire, Danny had stepped in to stop a fight inside Russo's Place. Mike was furious. He accused Danny of humiliating him in front of his own customers and swore that one day he would get even. It was the kind of statement people remembered, and when the firefighter disappeared, those words came back to haunt him.
Then came the white truck. A Polaroid taken just before the Riverside blaze showed a box-style truck parked near the side entrance. The details were blurry, the license plate washed out by glare, but investigators noted the make and build. Mike owned the same model. In a town this small, coincidence was hard to believe. As if that wasn't enough, a gas station attendant stepped forward. He swore that on the night of the fire just before midnight, Mike stopped in and bought a can of gasoline. To investigators, it sounded like a match struck against dry kindling. A man with a grudge, a white truck, a purchase of gasoline hours before the mill went up in flames. When police brought Mike in, they also examined his clothes. His jacket smelled of gasoline, but the lab work in 1987 couldn't place him inside the mill or prove the fuel came from Riverside. The evidence was circumstantial, but for many, it was enough. Mike claimed he was at his bar all night. He told police he stayed until 1 in the morning talking to staff and regulars. But when investigators pulled his cash register logs, a troubling gap appeared. Between 11:55 p.m. and 12:20 a.m., there were no recorded generations. That window overlapped almost perfectly with the moment Danny vanished inside the mill. By then, Laura Bennett had already been dragged through the spotlight as the first suspect. With her alibi cracking, investigators turned their eyes toward Russo. His name was officially added to the case file as suspect number 2. Rumors swept through Millbrook like wildfire. Some said Russo wasn't just a hothead bar owner, but also connected to shady fuel sales and underground insurance schemes. No hard evidence supported it, but the whispers added another layer of smoke to his story. Mike fought back against the accusations. He told anyone who would listen, "I had nothing to do with this. The only reason you're looking at me is because my truck looks like the one in that picture." His defiance didn't soften the suspicion. No witness ever placed him at Riverside that night. No fingerprint, no strand of hair, no clear proof tied him to the fire. Still, the circumstantial evidence, and the town's memory of his threats, cemented his role as the convenient villain. The fallout was devastating. Customers stopped coming to Russo's place. Friends drifted away. The bar that had once been his pride slowly emptied out until it closed its doors for good. Mike was never charged, but the stain of suspicion never left. In the eyes of many, there were only 2 likely culprits: Laura Bennett, the bitter ex-wife, and Mike Russo, the angry bar owner. The police kept circling them, even as the physical evidence at Riverside pointed towards something bigger. Neither Laura nor Mike would ever face trial for Danny Walsh's disappearance. Yet their lives unraveled under the weight of rumor and doubt. And while the town focused on them, crucial leads sat ignored in dusty files. The story of Mike Russo shows how easy it was for suspicion to stick, and how quickly a community can turn a troubled man into a presumed. If you've been following this far, hit like so more people can uncover the truth, and subscribe so you don't miss the next part. In part 6, we'll look at how investigators turned the wrong way, how gossip drowned out evidence, and how critical mistakes left the real culprits in the shadows. What do you think? Was Mike Russo unfairly branded, or did the gaps in his story justify the suspicion? Share your thoughts in the comments. From the start, investigators set their sights on Laura Bennett and Mike Russo. Almost every resource was aimed at them. The odd details at Riverside Mill, the forced side door, the chemical traces, the strange boot marks, were treated as background noise. The case file hardened quickly around a single story. Danny's disappearance was tied to personal conflict, not something larger. The mill's owner filed a major insurance claim within days of the fire. It was rejected by the company for suspected fraud, a red flag that should have shifted the focus. Instead, the issue was left to the insurance lawyers. Detectives did not press further into possible arson-for-profit schemes. That trail went cold before it even began. Key evidence was brushed aside. The scratched coupling on the hose was logged but explained away as sloppy handling in the heat of the fire.
Danny's missing black notebook, where he had documented a string of suspicious fires, was ignored as irrelevant. Even the Polaroid photo of a white box truck near the mill was labeled uncertain. Without clear proof, investigators moved on. Within months, the case file was passed from one officer to another. Each change meant new summaries, new interpretations, and gaps where details slipped away. The investigation lost any sense of continuity. What began as a major case slowly turned into a patchwork of half-finished reports. Danny's family refused to stay quiet. His parents and siblings wrote letters, demanded meetings, begged for the search to widen beyond Laura and Mike. They were firm. Danny would never abandon his daughter. But their appeals were treated as emotional rather than factual. The case stayed locked on the same path. For Laura, life became unbearable. Then came the cruelest rumor of all, that Danny had staged his own disappearance. People said he was drowning in debt, that he wanted to start over. They pointed to his divorce and his exhaustion as proof. For his family, already grieving, it was another wound. Their son, their brother, turned from victim into suspect in the public's eye. The police fed this cycle by their own inaction. An internal memo bluntly stated, most likely linked to family or personal dispute. No independent review ever challenged that conclusion. In time, the community lost faith in its own law enforcement. If the police couldn't or wouldn't look deeper, who would? Millbrook itself began to fracture. Half the town blamed Laura, the other half Mike. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion. A small-town bond, once strong, unraveled in the shadow of a single unsolved case. All the while, the real perpetrators walked freely. Robert Kincaid, Danny's superior officer, remained respected. Harold Pike, the electrical inspector, continued his career without question. Both men stayed well outside the circle of suspicion, while Laura and Mike carried the weight of rumor for years. It seemed the truth would never surface. But in 1992, 5 years after the fire, Riverside Mill was demolished to make way for a parking lot. Buried under the concrete, new evidence waited. The next discovery would shatter everything investigators thought they knew. In Part 7, the ground itself will reveal the truth, and the old theories will collapse under the weight of what was hidden beneath. By 1992, the Riverside Mill was nothing more than a crumbling ruin. The decision was made to clear the site and replace it with a parking lot. For most people in Millbrook, it felt like closing the book on an old tragedy. But when demolition crews began to dig, they uncovered something that turned the case upside down. Beneath the soil, workers found a small piece of metal. It was a steel coupling, streaked with faded red paint. Fire investigators recognized it instantly. It belonged to the type of equipment used by the fire department. It should not have been buried under concrete. The find raised immediate questions. Why would a firefighting tool end up beneath the mill? Construction halted. Crews jackhammered through the slab and pried open the space. The smell of old smoke still lingered inside. Within the dark chamber lay evidence that stunned everyone involved. The first object pulled from the rubble was a fire helmet. Not just any helmet, a second one, matching the type used by Millbrook Fire Station 3. It did not appear in the original list of lost equipment. Next to it, bone fragments were found. Among them was a wrist, still showing the marks of plastic restraints. The remains were sent for forensic testing. Dental records confirmed what Danny's family had feared for years. It was Danny Walsh. The discovery proved what his parents had insisted from the beginning. Danny had not run away. He had died that night inside Riverside, but the condition of the remains told investigators something even darker. Danny had been restrained before his death. The chamber also held paperwork. Among the debris was an electrical inspection report, supposedly filed the week before the fire. Experts quickly determined it was fake. The signature at the bottom belonged to Harold Pike, the town's electrical inspector. The document was a forgery, designed to legitimize the fire as an accident. Phone records added another layer. Logs from public payphones near Riverside showed 2 calls placed to Pike's number on the night of the fire. Both happened around the same time Danny's radio went silent. The coincidence was too sharp to ignore. The financial trail deepened the suspicion. Banking records revealed Pike had received a large payment from a real estate company just days after the Riverside blaze. The same company later purchased fire-damaged properties in the district at suspiciously low prices. The evidence pointed to a coordinated scheme, with Pike playing a role in covering it up. Attention then turned to Robert Kincaid, Danny's superior on the night of the fire. When investigators re-examined shift records, they noticed discrepancies. Kincaid had altered the log of who entered and exited the mill that night. His presence at multiple suspicious fires in the Riverside district over the years stood out like a warning signal. For 6 years, Laura Bennett and Mike Russo had lived under the cloud of suspicion.
The town that had once turned on Laura and Mike now turned in shock toward its own institutions. The trusted fire officer, the reliable inspector, the men who should have been protecting the community were suddenly the most likely suspects. The question was no longer whether Danny had vanished by choice or misfortune. The evidence showed he had been silenced, and the men who silenced him had walked free for years, while others carried the blame. In Part 8, the final twist will be revealed. How investigators built the case against Kincaid and Pike, how the trial unfolded, and how the truth shattered the old story that had divided Millbrook for so long. In 1993, 6 years after the fire at Riverside Mill, the case of Danny Walsh was finally reopened. His remains had been discovered beneath the ground where the mill once stood, along with new evidence that shifted the entire direction of the investigation. A special task force was formed with one mission only: to determine what really happened that night. Public pressure was immense. The small town of Millbrook had lived with rumors, suspicion, and anger for years. Families demanded answers. The community wanted closure. The investigation could no longer hide behind speculation. The new team began by reviewing the original firehouse records. That's when Robert Kincaid, the deputy fire chief who had been in command that night, came under scrutiny. His logs didn't match the testimony of others on duty. Pages were altered. Times were inconsistent. Witnesses from the crew recalled seeing Kincaid near the basement shortly before Danny's final radio call. His presence there made no sense unless he was directly involved in whatever Danny had stumbled upon. The suspicion grew. Had Kincaid silenced Danny to protect something far larger than an accidental blaze? Attention also turned to Harold Pike, the electrical inspector who had signed off on the official report. The investigators pulled the old document from storage and found irregularities. Forensic handwriting specialists confirmed what the naked eye had missed years before. The signature was authentic, but the report itself was falsified. It described conditions in the mill that didn't exist. Then came another discovery. Even darker rumors surfaced when a former warehouse worker stepped forward. He told investigators that after the fire, he had seen Kincaid carrying a small black notebook away from the station. Danny was known to keep a notebook, a private record of fires he believed were deliberate. That notebook never resurfaced. If it was Danny's, Kincaid had destroyed the one document that tied all the suspicious blazes together. The town's earlier witness also returned to the spotlight. A man who lived near the river had reported seeing two figures on the bank just before the fire roared out of control. At the time, his testimony was brushed aside as vague. But now, with the evidence of a cover-up, the description aligned with the theory that Danny was ambushed, pulled underground, and silenced. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Danny had gone into the basement after hearing strange noises. There, he confronted Kincaid and Pike preparing the ignition. He tried to call for backup on his radio. In the struggle, Kincaid tore the antenna away, killing the signal. The scuff marks on the hose coupling matched a violent pull. The fracture on Danny's wrist bones showed he had been tied with plastic restraints, the same kind used for equipment at the station. Danny hadn't vanished by chance. He had been bound, trapped inside a service tunnel, and buried when the cement was poured. Armed with this new evidence, the district attorney filed charges. In the summer of 1993, the trial of Robert Kincaid and Harold Pike opened to a packed courthouse. Reporters filled every bench. For Millbrook, this was not only a trial about one man's death. It was a trial about the truth the town had ignored for 6 years. Danny's family sat in the front row. His daughter, only 12 now, watched the proceedings unfold, finally old enough to understand why her father never came home. The prosecution presented a tight narrative. They walked the jury through the discovery of Danny's remains, the falsified report, the phone calls, and the unexplained money transfers. They replayed the radio log, ending abruptly at 0011 with Danny's last words. They pointed to the tampered duty roster, showing how Kincaid manipulated the records to cover the gaps. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict. Robert Kincaid was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Harold Pike was convicted of conspiracy and fraud, receiving 25 years. For the first time, the truth was written into the public record. Danny Walsh had not run away. He had not staged his disappearance. He had been killed by men inside the very system he trusted. Laura Bennett, Danny's ex-wife, was officially cleared of suspicion. So was Mike Russo, the bar owner who had lived under whispers for years. Both had lost friends, jobs, and reputations because of the wrong focus of the original investigation. Standing outside the courthouse, Laura told reporters, "They stole 6 years of my life with lies. But today, at least, the truth has caught up." For Danny's family, the verdict brought both closure and pain. They received a posthumous Medal of Honor in his name. The department publicly recognized his service and sacrifice. His daughter accepted the medal on his behalf. It was a solemn moment, but it gave the family something tangible to hold on to. Recognition that Danny had died not as a deserter, but as a firefighter who stood against corruption. The community, too, began to heal. Where there had once been division and suspicion, there was now understanding. Neighbors who had turned against each other slowly rebuilt trust. The fire department implemented reforms, introducing outside oversight for major cases. Local schools used the story as a lesson on critical thinking and justice. And Millbrook finally honored Danny, not with rumors, but with respect. The vanishing firefighter had ended, but its impact remained. It was a story of how easily truth can be buried, how quickly suspicion can destroy innocent lives, and how vital it is to follow the evidence, not the gossip. If this story has moved you, don't let it fade. Hit like so more people will hear Danny's name. Subscribe to follow more cases where justice was delayed but never denied. And share your thoughts in the comments. What lesson should Millbrook and all of us take from the long fight to bring the truth to light.